Hello everyone, my name is Steve Kirk. I'm 58 years old and I live in Stratford-upon-Avon in the UK. Well, my history with music. I've always been a huge music fan. I've enjoyed my music, for 40 years now. I remember when I was at school going to the local record shop with my mates to go and listen to records and to buy the latest LPs. And I've been a big fan of punk, rock, pop, Britpop, and a bit of classical and blues as well ever since. But my career wasn't in music, I was in IT. So basically that was all on hold for a long time. And it's really in just the last 10 years, which I've sort of approached retirement, I've had more time to then spend to, first of all, learning to play the drums. And I played in a covers band for a while, which was great fun. But then more recently, as what I would describe myself as a music maker. I certainly would describe myself as a musician, because unfortunately I just don't have that aptitude, that skill to pick up an instrument and just sort of like express yourself through it. But I do love making music, by which I mean composing, recording, mastering, mixing and mastering, producing something that I can then share with everyone on SoundCloud or any other way of distributing to everyone else, like on this community. So the first piece of music I ever composed or wrote, well, maybe not composed, but I started really about 5 years ago. I was lucky enough to have 3 days in a recording studio, where I know he owned the recording studio. I joined him, and we basically spent 3 days putting together a piece of music and going through the whole process of basically recording, tracking, mixing and mastering. And that really got me into the technology side of music production. And after that, I came back, got myself a free DAW, put that on my computer, and then started playing around. And I think I started really with samples, like most people, rather than actually composition, putting together loops, adding some spoken word off which I'd either taken off the net or recorded. And just came up with some very simple sort of ideas, really. And it's only in the last year or two I've started to compose in the sense of planning out a song structure and record and using notation. But I think that's a lot of people have come from that point of view. So you start off simple and then just get more and more sophisticated in a way, I suppose you could say. Well, 3 words to describe my music. That's hard, isn't it? I mean, to try and summarise it. But 3 I'd choose. First of all, first one will be professional. Don't want to sound big-headed, but I'm trying to make my music sound as close to what the professionals will produce as possible. It's always interesting, I find, when I'm making a piece of music to get some reference tracks to compare to, and then to see, if I can get to an equivalent level of quality, if you like, to what the real musicians and the real music producers can do. The second thing I would say, is emotional. When I make music, I don't want to make it boring. I certainly don't find it boring. Hopefully nobody listening to it finds it boring. I mean, whether it's EDM or whether it's blues or rock or whatever the genre, I hope that it makes people feel happy, sad, want to dance, want to cry, whatever. And that's, again, so I think that's the real challenge, but it's something that I continually I think as your style evolves, you get better and better at it. Obviously you get away from a more sort of standard approach. But certainly that's a goal, I guess, as well as a description, what I want to do with my music. And the third one, slightly odd word, I suppose, but respectful. Respectful in that I love the fact that learning or rather composing forces me to learn about music and to listen to other types of music and to appreciate how it's done and how the great songwriters and musicians have worked in the past. So I also want to make sure what I do is follows the guidelines and the way that other people have done it in the past. I enjoy working within a particular genre or different genres. So those are my 3 words. The things that inspire me are more external than internal, by which I mean that I know a lot of musicians and songwriters are inspired by their lives and by the events that are happening in their lives and how they feel. I'm more inspired by events, things happening outside of my life. So, for example, I mean, the terrible war in Ukraine, that is inspiring me to think about developing a piece. It's one of my next projects. So it's the news, it's current affairs, it's things like that which inspire me to want to create something musically which sort of expresses my thoughts and feelings about that particular subject. And also, rather bizarrely, I suppose, is also, I mean, the technology also inspires me as well. As I said, I enjoy the music tech side of things. I love playing around with the computer, with the DAW, and trying out new plugins. So if I get a new plugin, a vocoder or something like that, which produces a particular sound, I might think, well, how could I create a piece of music that would utilize that, just to sort of see how I can get to grips with it and get to use it. So I think it's external things that I find inspiring. My last piece of work is called Other Worlds, and it's based on The Planets, a very famous classical piece by Gustav Holst. And the reason I chose that as my inspiration was that, first of all, it's a piece of music I know and I love it. And secondly, it was very interesting reading about it, that each of the planets has their own specific personality. And it occurred to me that each different personality or style would be suited to a different style or genre of music. So it became a great way to learn about other genres that I really didn't know about. So blues, jazz fusion, even a bit of metal. I mean, I attempted to compose a piece of music in metal style, which sort of works, but it probably isn't the best one, I have to say. But anyway, it was fascinating to learn about these other genres, and particularly how the song form is structured, and things like typical kind of rhythms and key signatures and motifs and so on that were used in each of those styles. And finally, in between, I thought, well, what would be a good way to take the listener from one planet to the next? And I thought, well, I'll just use some samples from each piece of music in a very sort of very simple way, just an ambient way, without any real structure, but just a sort of like a short one-piece of ambient journey, if you like, from one planet to the next. So it gave me a chance to try a lot of different styles, and I'm really happy with it. I'm pleased with the way it's come out. It's taken me about a year. And what's interesting is coming back to the first ones I did, I was dreading it, thinking, oh God, I hope they're okay. I hope they just don't sound awful. So it was quite reassuring to listen to them again after so long and think, yeah, they're okay, they're fine. Now I don't need to redo these at all. So that was my inspiration for Other Worlds. So the creative process I use, well, the first thing to say, I think, is that I do have a process. I'm naturally quite a sort of a logical, process-based person, which, by the way, I don't think stops you being creative. I think it's very important to improve, to have a process. But I need to sort of have steps in a process I can follow to make sure I'm sort of working in a repeatable and way that I can improve each time I do a song. So to start with, one of my pieces of music in Other Worlds, for example, I would think, right, this particular genre, do some research. So I go on to Wikipedia, go on to YouTube Music, and start sort of finding out who are the well-known performers, what are the classic tracks, if you like, for each of these genres. Listen to those, find out as much as I can about the song structure, how it's, what key it's in, what time signature it's in, all the technical details, if you like, about it. So I can start to understand how that particular piece of music would have been put together. Once I've got that idea of how to approach it, then I decide either if it's a piece of music, say for example, like a jazz fusion piece, I think, well, that needs to be composed. So obviously I go into Flat and use that as my composition tool and start to build up the project from there. And once I'd reached the point where I was happy with that and think, right, now I'm ready to start actually recording the tracks, if you like, and mixing it and mastering it, Then I transfer that into my DAW, and then choose the instruments I want, and then start to, as I say, to basically to mix it, add in some articulations, and to produce the final result. It's interesting, other genres, for example, the last piece of music in other worlds is ambient. And that I deliberately didn't go through a composition piece, because it is intended to be very much more creative, in the sense of just coming up with something on the keyboard and just going with that. So that I skipped using flat, and I just went straight to my DAW and just started playing around with different synth sounds and different effects, and that worked really well. I mean, I think it sounds great, and composition would have helped me, but normally I would go through a composition process, particularly if it's obviously a classical piece or a jazz fusion or even a blues piece. That's a very interesting question. Does my music reflect my personality? And that's something I've never thought about, and I don't know whether people do think about that. You consciously think this is reflecting my personality, but I think it's, as I said before, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I like things to be right and to sound good. So I hope when people hear my music, they think, yeah, that's very professional. It sounds like it could have been done in the studio, and that it's sort of it doesn't sort of sound amateurish. That's the other way of saying it. But I really use composition, as I said before, really as a way of reflecting my love of music. I mean, I find it a way of just learning more about music and reflecting my own interest in music, maybe more than my personality. So it's more reflecting musical genres and styles, and producing something which is sort of in that sort of type of approach, rather than coming up with something which is dramatically new or different. That's not really me. As I say, I don't think I'm groundbreaking. I'm not trying to come up with something which has never been done before. I'm just trying to pay homage, if you like, to some of the great styles of music that we all listen to every day. I mean, music is a huge part of my life. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't spend so much of my time sitting at a keyboard or a PC playing around, coming up with new pieces of music. And I think it's because it moves me. I think hearing music is the way that I feel emotion. And I don't get it from looking at art, for example. I mean, a lot of people, obviously, you go to an art gallery, or go to a book, and pictures would give them that emotional message. That doesn't work for me. It's music that gets me every time. And I think, like a lot of people, there's pieces of music which you hear them and you just get an emotional reaction each time. And I think it's that which inspires me, and thinking if I can produce something which gives me an emotional reaction, and hopefully the same for people who are listening to it, then isn't that a wonderful thing? It's a wonderful gift to have. I can't imagine not being able to listen to music. I have a pretty extensive CD and remember them? Yeah, CDs and LPs, vinyl, and my wife and I listen to music all the time. It's just such an inspiring thing. I just think life would just be so miserable without music. Yeah, there's three things I think are important to me, and I hope will help other people as well. And you may have the same experience as me. The first thing I'd say is to make music and be a composer, you don't have to be a brilliant musician. I mean, I certainly don't consider myself a musician. I mean, if you put me in front of a keyboard and I just fumble through picking the notes out, I can't play fluently. But that doesn't matter. You can still make music with all the tools that are available. With some knowledge, you can still make some wonderfully rewarding music, which at least you will enjoy, hopefully other people as well. Which leads me on to the second point, which is just learn all the time. Just keep learning. I mean, all of these natural musicians who can just make music and play without any kind of formal training. That doesn't work for me at all. I can't do it. So I need to learn the music theory, and I spend a lot of time looking at subscribing to video training websites and learning music theory and how different instruments should be played, and how to do that in my DAW on the computer. And I really enjoy it, and I love learning anyway. So that's really rewarding for me. But I would suggest, spend money and time on that rather than spending it on the latest plugins and the latest fancy bits of equipment. And the third one, and again, this works for me, is have a process and keep a record of what you do. By which I mean I have a process from going through from composition right through to recording, tracking, mixing and mastering. And each time I write, every song I do, I keep notes on the computer on OneNote on what my references were and what I was trying to achieve, and how I did it, basically. And I mean, and especially when you create a piece of music, the last thing you want to do is sit down and write down how you did it. It was pretty boring. But the worst thing in the world is if you go back in a year or two's time and think, that sounded really good, how did I do it? And then find that you'd forgotten and you can't remember which plugins you used or what techniques you used or something like that. So it's laborious and it's boring, but do make sure you keep a record of what you've done and try and follow the same process and keep improving the process each time. And then your results will definitely improve as a result.